You're watching BCTV. We're all about Branford. You're watching BCTV, Branford Government Television, a service of Branford Community Television. This program is brought to you in part through the support of the town of Branford.
And I'm chairman of Branford's Inland Wetland Commission. This is a regular monthly meeting of the commission on November 14th, 2024. It is now 7 o'clock. The evening's meeting will be conducted as a virtual meeting using the Zoom conferencing platform. It's being held in accordance with Connecticut Public Act 22.3. Documents referenced during today's meeting are available at the town hall or on the agency's webpage. The agenda for tonight's meeting was filed on November 12th and is posted on the town's website. Does staff have any changes to the agenda this evening?
Peter, the current agenda was actually filed yesterday. It should say revised at the top.
This is the one with the addition on it?
Yes.
Okay, I stand corrected. Was filed on Wednesday, November 13th. No changes to the agenda, Jamie?
Not since the revised agenda.
Thank goodness. I'd like to address a few comments before commencing with tonight's meeting. First, providing public exposure to these proceedings, BCTV will be recording and broadcasting tonight's meeting. We're thankful for their participation, and the public can view the recordings on the appropriate cable TV channel. As participants in this evening's proceeding, please be considerate of the positioning of your camera so that your face is visible on the recording, especially when speaking. To ensure an accurate and complete record of discussions, each time a statement or comment is made during tonight's meeting, the party speaking must announce his or her name before articulating any comments. This applies to any party wishing to participate. Those wishing to speak may use the raise your hand feature to indicate such desire, and Inland Wetland staff will assist in identifying those wishing to speak. Once the meeting has begun, please mute your microphone if not speaking. This will prevent unwanted feedback from distorting communications. To speak, unmute your microphone. This is not intended to squelch participation. It's rather to provide some order. The intent is to have the meeting run smoothly and recording the information accurately. The commission wants to hear from all parties. Please be respectful with your comments. I'll now take a roll call from the commission and staff. When I announce your name, please reply present. Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Director and Enforcement Officer.
Present.
Katie Blanchett, Inland Wetland Associate.
Present.
Commissioner Goklowski.
Commissioner Goklowski, present.
Commissioner Begeman.
Commissioner Begeman, present.
Commissioner Boda.
Commissioner Boda, present.
Commissioner Ormrod.
Commissioner Ormrod, present.
All right, Commissioner Basserman, obviously present. There's 5 commissioners. All commissioners are therefore seated and able to vote. Per our regulations, up to 7 commissioners may vote on an issue.
Peter, you forgot Melissa.
I didn't see Melissa. Oh, it's not on my gallery view. Okay. Melissa Papat
Commissioner Papantonis, present.
is here. Great. So there are 6 commissioners. Is there any commissioner who must recuse themselves from any of the proceedings this evening?
This is Commissioner Ormrod. I will be recused from all matters regarding IW 240902. I think that is related to cease and correct 240701 items. Let's see, 3 and 4 on tonight's agenda.
Okay, duly noted. First up this evening is the approval of the minutes of the October 24th, 2024 meeting. After review, is there any motion to approve those minutes?
This is Commissioner Begamon. I move that we approve the minutes from the regular scheduled meeting on October 24, 2024.
Commissioner Boda, second.
Any discussion of those minutes after the second motion? Okay, all in favor of approval of the October 24th meetings as presented, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any abstentions? Any nays?
Commissioner Papantonis, I abstain.
Okay. First up, the enforcement activity, which is cease and correct 240901. Let's see, were we waiting for information on this, Jamie?
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. Yeah, we were. I did get a brief update right before the meeting from the soil scientist. So it sounds like we don't have new materials available at this time. I understand that some of this information that they're looking for is weather based, and we haven't been getting any rain. So I think kind of discussing timelines, process, and expectations are kind of the hot topics for tonight. I don't know if you want to hand it over to the soil scientist to elaborate on kind of the limitations in providing the information requested.
I think that's a good first start.
Good evening, everyone. George Logan for the record, soil scientist, wetland scientist. This falls a little bit on me. I've been a little delayed in providing the information to the manufacturer that was requested in order for them to specifically figure out what the amount of flocculant would be in the logs. And so that's on me. I need to get that information forthwith, and hopefully we'll have at least some information by the next meeting, if not maybe a rainstorm.
Anything else, Mr. Logan?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Jamie, you mentioned process and timing. Now that we know that information is to be still delivered, what are the remaining items that you want to discuss with the commission?
I think the main points here are the information for the actual installation and application of the proposed flocculant, the monitoring of that installation, and then after that monitoring is complete, reporting back to the commission so that the file can get closed out. So I guess the main thing, knowing we don't have the information right now, is when to continue it to, and hopefully continuing it to a point where we'll have that information so that we're minimizing the amount of meetings that everyone has to attend.
This is Commissioner Goklowski. Can we move this to have it as an agent approval or some course? If there's an issue, bring it back to the commission? Because apparently it looks like they've done everything to do everything the right way.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. With it being a cease and correct order, it really needs to be reviewed by the commission. That and the fact that it's actually within a water course, I can't do it administratively. So I guess at this point, my recommendation would be to continue it to the December 12th. Yes, the December 12th meeting, and then maybe leave it a little bit open-ended so that they can work with staff. And if for whatever reason they need another continuance, be it the weather, we can maybe talk about that and continue it to the January meeting if need be. At the same time, kind of understand, don't want to drag it out forever. So I guess the question for Mr. Logan would be, do you anticipate that the information requested would be available for the December 12th meeting?
I fully expect that. My part of my problem was my workload, which is starting to, I can see the end of the tunnel, the light. So that's going to be helpful.
Okay.
This is Commissioner Basserman. Mr. Logan, just a question. Do we need a significant rain event to bring that together, or is the information available even without that event?
Sure, the information can be available. The implementation would require a storm, obviously.
Okay. Does any commissioner have issue with continuing this item, this show cause hearing until the December 12th meeting? Okay,
Commissioner Bowden, no.
then let's follow up with Jamie's recommendation, picking December 12th as the continuation date for cease and correct 240901. Next up on the agenda is our public hearing, 240902. On September 26, 2024, the regular meeting of the Branford Inland Wetland Commission. Commission voted to open a public meeting on the application as it was determined that the proposed planned disturbance of a wetland on site in excess of 5,000 square feet warranted a public hearing. The date of November 14th, 24 was established to open that public hearing. Before proceeding, I wish to make some comments regarding tonight's hearing. Purpose of this hearing is a fact-finding mission to understand the application for a permit in its entirety. This is the Branford Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Commission. We are governed by Connecticut Statute 22A, our town regulations, which are drawn from 22A and modeled after a set of regulations issued by the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Commission applies those regulations in a fair and uniform manner across all applications that come before us. Commissioners that are seated for the application are required to be fair and independent, not predisposed to any outcome. Commission must decide the merit of the application from the facts as they appear on the record, from their own personal observation and technical expertise, and from the expertise of outside consultants hired to assist the commission in assessing the application. Permit decisions must be concluded within timeframes specified by Connecticut statutes and our regulations. Commission is not an environmental review board. It does not deal with planning and zoning issues. It is a wetlands agency, so we want to hear about activities that may have direct impact or effect on wetlands or watercourses. We accept applications as they are proposed and either approve or deny them. It is not uncommon for conditions to be included in permits granted. Commission has the responsibility to determine whether the application is consistent with its regulations. It is therefore important that the applicant has a full opportunity to discuss the details of the application. The Commission may ask questions during or after the applicant's presentation. This will be followed by a discussion with the peer review consultant hired for this application. After the Commission is finished with its questions, I will open the proceeding for public participation. Based on the information presented, the public hearing may be closed or continued to a future date. Does any commissioner have additional comments they would like to add to the record at this point?
This is Commissioner Boda. I have two, please. First, I didn't see the commissioner's CV document in the Dropbox for this file.
That is correct. We can add that.
Thank you. And then second, the material from the applicant asserts on multiple occasions that this application does not fall underneath the 2024 Stormwater Manual. And I would like to state right now that I would like for us to have a conversation about that, because that will have impacts on decisions. And so I would like to just put that out, because whether it's under the 2004 or the 2024 Stormwater Manual will make an impact on viewing this application.
Any other commissioner have comment? How about staff? Any comments from staff?
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. I don't know if you want me to touch base on that now or if you want to wait until after the initial presentation has been provided. I certainly see an argument for falling under the 2004 manual based on when the application was submitted relative to the guideline deadline, which was September 30th. This application was submitted before that. This application was also submitted before the commission's regulation change. And that time frame was provided for projects that had already been by and large under development. And that the initial application, which was withdrawn for this project, was submitted back in February of this year. So that's quite a bit before that September 30th deadline. And of course, they were spending time coming up with their plans before they submitted to us. So that's kind of my quick 2 cents on that, and we can dive more into it later. I feel like there was something else I wanted to mention.
Jamie, this is Commissioner Boda. I just, in response to that, I did one of the trainings that happened, I want to say in the fall. And I think that there were, if I'm not mistaken, there were 2 dates. There was the kind of initial rollout date with then a grace period based on when an application was, the actual application itself was developed, but that there is also a shovels in the ground date. And I think it would just be helpful to get some guidance from the state, because I think that we are potentially past that shovels in the ground date. So I just want to put that out there, that although the applicant has asserted that they do not fall under the 2024 Stormwater Manual, I don't know that that is accurate by all accounts, by state accounts, or that we are bound to their interpretation of the state's plan.
This is Commissioner Bassman. Okay, so we've got that as an issue that we have to deal with. It's probably worthwhile having the applicant make the presentation as they have presented, and then we'll deal with this issue. It may even require some external input beyond, the scope of this meeting. A particular note regarding the meetings this evening, is that meetings have tended to be lengthy during the 2024 season, even though we're meeting twice a month. The nature of the discussions generally get pretty detailed, and full attention and concentration is required. So to manage the evening's agenda, I asked that a 2-hour limit be imposed for this public hearing. If that window isn't sufficient, then I will ask for a continuation to the next regularly scheduled meeting in December. And I think that means that within the presentation, as well as the peer review and any public comment, we try to conclude that within the 2-hour limit. If not, we'll be moving it along till the next meeting. So I'm going to turn it over now to the applicant for Inland Wetland 240902.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. For the record, my name is Attorney Timothy Lee. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Fasano, Ippolito, Lee, and Florentine, now with an office at 107 Montague Street here in Branford. And I'm here representing the applicant, Beacon Hill Properties. The commission is probably well familiar with this application because, as Jamie mentioned, it was before you over the course of the summertime. Unfortunately, due to time constraints on the public hearing side of things, we were not able to complete the full application. So we ended up resubmitting the version of the application that is before you tonight. In sum and substance, the application is the same as the one that you considered and that was before you over the summertime. However, we did make some tweaks to the application. We are still proposing a 22-unit age-restricted residential housing development on the property or properties. There's actually a number of properties because the property was previously subdivided into 10 lots. And if this application is approved, we would merge those 10 lots into one larger lot for the purposes of creating the 22-unit 55 and over housing complex. With me tonight is Zach Georgina. He is the project engineer from Juliana Associates, and George Logan from REMA Ecological Services. He is a soil scientist. And finally, Doug Anderson is a representative of the developer. He is here as well. We can happy to try to answer any questions the commission has after we make our presentation. At this point in time, I turn it over to Zach to run us through the site plan.
Good evening. I'm just going to share my screen here. I assume that I have that ability already. Just if we can all confirm that we're looking at what I'm looking at. Should be the site plan.
Yes.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay. So as mentioned, we are looking to, sorry about that. We are looking to come in here and propose the 22-unit 7-building site plan to be accessed by a main driveway coming in with 2 branches, one short branch coming to the north to service buildings 1 and 2, with the remaining branch coming down to a town-compliant cul-de-sac servicing buildings 3 through 7. As the site currently is resides, if we jump to the end here, which is the original surveys, topographically speaking, the site is it's a valley with the east side and west side being uphill and a low spot running through the bottom of the property. Both the original subdivision that we are superseding here and our proposal involves connecting these 2 hillsides through the valley. So if we go back up to our site plan, since we've just gone a little bit over that here, back up to sheet. There we go. As you can see here, this is our site plan with grading on, just so we can see some of the contour lines. But really wetlands-wise, what we're looking at here is we have a northern wetland and a southern wetland with a little bit of a water course wetland that sneaks up towards where the site was previously developed. This site has a long history. It was a farm back in the 1930s. In the 1960s, it became a meat packaging facility. And somewhere around the year 2000, it became vacant with all structures being removed, foundations left in the ground, and existing asphalt, driveway, broken gravel, things you would see on a site that had been cleared from buildings. The previous structures were located in the valley. And that's actually why we see a lot of the shapes that we see for the existing wetlands. You can see the, actually, if I go back to sheet 1 real quick, just for the wetlands sake here, you can see that we have these green areas of wetlands that we're proposing to build out. But so ignore those for the time being. We're really looking at the blue and the orange. Blue and orange are existing wetlands that are going to have some form of impact, and the orange are wetlands that are going to essentially have a permanent impact on them. But as you can see with this little finger coming up from the southern wetland, there's this area of asphalt around here with an existing building foundation that really is what's causing this wetland to have formed and be the shape that it is. Similarly, up to the north, we just have the bold site. We have this area of asphalt extending back here, and that's actually what's connecting these 2 wetlands when there is flow. Mr. Logan has, based on his wetlands report, has seen that there's essentially an over driveway flow from this old asphalt that connects these 2 sections. So this site is far from virgin. But now, specifically, since we've gone into the buildings, the structures, the roadways, what are we doing about stormwater? So what we're looking to do is, through a series of catch basins, collect the water in the roadways, pass it into a hydrodynamic separator into this basin for controlled release and detention. So if we jump over here just so we can see our catch basins, with multiple catch basins located throughout the site, all feeding down here to a hydrodynamic separator, which essentially is a water treatment system that allows water to enter. It's forced into a circular motion. All of your trash, garbage, impurities are essentially forced outside of the centrifuge and are collected by filters, allowing for pre-treatment of stormwater flows for the first inch. And we actually did size this to the 2024 guideline as requested under the previous application. This will handle the first 1.3 inches of a storm. So that was what this was sized to in terms of coming halfway, so to speak. So that was upgraded in size. The basin itself, as water enters the basin, it is a flat bottom basin with a sand filter in the bottom, which is essentially a filter median with an inlaid perforated pipe to allow water to slowly infiltrate into that and then be released on the south side of the basin. You can see that if we zoom in here a little bit more with here as part of our
Mr. Georgina.
Jack, you keep cutting out.
If you can hear us, you've been cutting out. Mr. Georgina, can you hear us?
Hold on. Am I back yet?
Yes, we lost you a little bit ago.
Am I back?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
We lost you probably a minute and a half ago.
Yep, I believe I was talking about the curtain drain, the sand filter.
Yes.
Okay, so the sand filter, as mentioned, essentially is a filter median with perforated pipe, allowing water to infiltrate through that sand filter, allowing for that to mimic the natural infiltration process, and then that water to gradually trickle out into this wetlands area we're looking to create as part of remediation and rebeautification of the wetlands to the south. In addition to this, as this is a fairly high volume situation, we're looking to reduce peak flows by further mitigating both the size of this basin and essentially trying to keep the basin as small as possible while retaining the maximum amount of water. We're also going to be looking at an outlet control structure, a detail of which is on this sheet here. So what we're looking at for the outlet control structure is essentially an elevated catch basin. That would be a concrete structure with a high water overflow grate on top, two pipes drilled into the side of this basin. So as water flows, it will build up, being retained on site to maintain the stormwater quality volume, gets passed through the filter. And then as we go up, we have two 6-inch bores inlets that gradually allow water in and then to pass through a 24-inch reinforced concrete pipe beyond. So a metered release to really slow down the velocity and the flow volume of water leaving the site from the stormwater system. And you can see here, this is a little bit larger detail just of the configuration here, where this 24-inch pipe is going to be also coming down here, and in smaller storms, very, very small flow, essentially be having the two 6-inch pipes being engaged. So equivalent of about an 8-inch pipe's worth of flow coming out of this large pipe. With the larger storms, if we were to ever hit that 100-year storm, we'd be seeing higher velocities with the appropriately sized riprap apron in the bottom to really allow those flows to not disturb any plants that are incursioning in here and allow that survivability and longevity of the system. We are also having an emergency spillway up top. However, there would have to be a failure of the outlet control device before this would be at all used. We're not relying on that for any storm up to the 100-year storm. There's no overflow through the emergency spillway. It is, in fact, just an emergency spillway. Moving on to the last major engineering concern is this does have a 14-acre watershed that feeds this northern wetland. So what we have done here is when coming in, we've put ourselves a 30-inch pipe to allow for this, essentially as water comes in here, it would detain, and that's a matter of having this land bridge across, short of opening this entire span up with a bridge from side to side. There's going to be some form of water detention in the northern wetland and passing it through in a fairly short period from the peak flow from the peak height of the water. In a 100-year storm, we're only looking at close to 18 hours worth of detention, so less than a 24-hour mark, which shouldn't impact the hydrological function, but that's going to be addressed by Mr. Logan. So this really covers the meat and potatoes of the site plan itself. I just want to touch on the phasing plans real quick because we are putting a sizable amount of effort into making sure that we're not impacting the wetlands as much as possible. So initially in phase one, we're looking to utilize the existing driveway into the site, establishing silt fence, reinforced silt fence, water bars, staging areas, and stockpile areas, specifically in this lower valley here, so that everything is set up before we start any major earthwork maneuvers, that we have all of the silt, the S&E controls installed. One thing we will be doing here is installing a stone-lined bypass along the perimeter of this phase one area, and using a wood chip berm to direct storm flows from this northern wetland into the stone-lined bypass. So essentially, we're not having storm flows come through our staging area, but directed around the staging area. As well as creating a more stable driveway slope coming up into where the next phase is going to have the bulk of his activity, and establishing a temporary sediment trap to collect stormwater from the next phase, which is our heavy earthwork. As you can see here, we start to see grades changing quite a bit, removing material from where buildings 1 and 2 are, building up this lower basin, or this lower earthwork area, building our basin itself, and installing our pipe system coming across here for the bypass. This will all be done under the supervision of a geotechnical engineer to make sure that the lifts are installed appropriately, so this continues to remain a stable slope. We're looking to stabilize any adjacent wetland or interior basin slope with hydroseed, to get that as quickly as possible, having vegetation growing on it, because that's really going to be our saving grace, so to speak. Is if we can get the vegetation growing there, we're going to see the benefits of that stabilization. Slopes along the perimeter, where we can buy ourselves a little time here. I'm looking at having this stabilized with erosion control mats and seeded, so that we're going to be getting that long-term stabilization on these larger slopes over, as you can see, behind buildings 1 and 2, and on the exterior edge of the basin. We'll also bring utilities in during this phase, pave the first section, and install our first compliant construction entrance, coming essentially functioning as part of our subgrade here of the roadway. So we're trying to keep our construction entrances as far as we can into the site. Moving on to phase 2, phase 3, finishing the land bridge, undertaking clearing, grubbing operations, begin construction work on buildings 1 and 2, install a new sediment trap with swale to collect any sediment flows coming off of where buildings 5, 6, and 7 are to be. And then finally, looking to maintain these perimeter and independent buildings, silt fences for as long as possible, till we have stabilization around every single building achieved, and maintain these lower, I'm going to refer to them as the Hail Mary defenses, but essentially the end of the line defenses here, to make sure that any sediments trying to enter our newly established wetlands are contained. Anything that gets in there and wants to bypass is also contained, and doesn't travel off-site onto the town's property. So at that point, I'd like to open up if there are any additional questions on the engineering element of it from the commission.
This is Commissioner Basserman. In the plans that were provided, I think the date is November, at least the plans I have, November 6th.
Yep.
Is there a construction sequence identified in those plans? Because there's a lot of things moving here. And
Yep,
I guess from a timing standpoint, do we have something that outlines what happens first, what happens, following? I didn't see it in the plans provided.
So in each phasing sheet, so phase sheet one has its own phasing narrative included. Phase two has its own phasing narrative included, and these are essentially so to start out. Phase one timing note. Phase one has two major considerations for timing. Firstly, phase one utilizes the existing valley for staging and stockpiling. As such, phase one should be undertaken during Connecticut's dry season, mid-May through August. Secondly, this development is both reliant on and in part involved with the
Yeah,
approved sanitary line. But
Commissioner Bassman, what sheet
yep.
am I looking at?
So this is sheet. It starts on sheet 8 of 22. The phase one. It's located in the top left corner of the drawing.
It starts out with phase narrative. Is that where I'm looking?
Correct. Yep.
Thank you.
This is Commissioner Begeman. I just have a question. You have the stock in phase one.
Mhm.
You have stockpiling in the current wetland. There's that one half stockpile. The third one up from the bottom.
Yep. This one right here, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
So I'm just wondering that there's a wetland there, and there's no. I understand that wetland is going to disappear, but it looks like you're stockpiling right in the wetland. So can you explain how that process is going to take place so that stuff doesn't migrate downstream and cause issues before that wetland is whatever you're planning to do with it?
I do apologize. I'm having internet connections tonight. I'm sorry. Could you please repeat your question? I lost the middle part there.
Commissioner Begeman. So that stockpile looks like it's in the wetland. And my question is, how do you protect damage to whatever water is coming through there and carrying stockpiling material to anything downstream?
Nope, not yet. Okay, I think I'm back. I do apologize. So what we are looking to do here is essentially to intercept ahead of this well.
You're phasing out.
It might help, Zach, if
Can't
you
hear.
turn off your video.
So as I understand your question, and I do apologize for the internet
Nope.
here, and start the wetland as we're doing this. So with this
Still cutting out.
chip on the stage.
Commissioner Boda, I wonder if Mr. Georgina stops screen sharing, and if you screen share,
We can try that.
if that might help his bandwidth.
Am I back yet?
Yes.
Okay. So hopefully we're trying to direct water around this wetland area as we are going to be removing it in the long run here. And this is going to be our staging area with that stone bypass swale and the wood chip berm to just direct those flows around the site. Flows trying to enter the site will be hitting not only the perimeter silt fence along the north, but the required silt fence rings around the base of the silt fences. So any flows that fight us on this are not going to be traveling very far. The goal is to keep it from going around the site, around our staging area.
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. While we're here, I did have a couple of questions. So I did ask for the limits of disturbance to kind of be marked on the site plan, which have been added through kind of bolding out this clearing limit line and by adding these red, what'd you call them?
I believe I called them witness.
Stakes.
Yeah.
One of my it seems to line up really well on phase 2 with the proposed activity. But on phase 1, one of my concerns would be that the area is cleared all the way up to these red witness markers when the phasing isn't really ready for that. And then the other question I had is kind of the erosion controls over in this northeast corner. When is this area proposed to get cleared relative to phase 1 moving into phase 2? Because I noticed the erosion controls do shift for phase 2. So I guess I'm kind of wondering what's the intent of having the erosion controls where they are in this area on phase 1?
So the intent of the erosion controls in that location on phase 1 is phase 1 includes the clearing and grubbing of this area. So there's going to be a lot of stump disturbance. And so with the wood chips we're going to have and silt fence, we're looking to try and contain this to make sure that we don't have, if a storm event comes, we don't have something where from our disturbed soils, we're now kicking this downstream and it gets into an area we don't want it to go in the northern wetland. Once we start actually starting our earthwork, these still perimeter controls that we have on phase 1 are to remain until we get to a point where obviously we're grading through them. So they'd have to be, at that point, the new phase 2 silt fence installed, and these would be removed at that time. Because we are doing, I believe it's close to 10 feet worth of cut in this area. So they'll be there for a decent period of time.
So the intent would be to clear and grub this area when the rest of phase 1 is cleared and grubbed.
Correct. Clear, not grub necessarily on the exterior side. It's hard to justify because you want to run your sediment and erosion controls along the ridge line. That's where they're most effective. If you put them on midway on a slope, you're going to see them eventually become overwhelmed fairly rapidly because you're getting that higher velocity. So you want to try to contain as much as possible in this area that you have along that ridge line. So on the backside, now from my walking of the site here, I think this is fairly mostly emergent species, sumacs, fairly small stuff. So I think the clearing operation wouldn't require the additional rubbing you would see of pulling up root stumps and more established that you get as you go further up the hill.
And then in regards to the clearing limits in phase 1, how is the contractor on site going to know where they should be clearing for phase 1 relative to the proposed erosion controls?
So really for the phase 1, we're looking to, clear where buildings 1 and 2 are. By adding the witnesses, that's really the extent of where we would be impacting within the wetlands or upland review area. So that's really the hard stop to prevent a contractor from going beyond where any phase is going. I tend to find in practice putting out there the contractor of do not cross this line, period and amen, gets a better response than, okay, here's your phase 1. And they go, I've seen on other sites where contractors or tree guys get a little overzealous and next thing you know, you have an overclearing. I think with the intent of this is buildings 1 and 2 really on top of the ridge with the hard stop lines is going to be beneficial for the contractor and the health of the project overall during construction.
Yeah, I guess my concern is making sure that clearing stops here and not here on the slope, because if this is cleared, then the erosion controls would need to be on that slope instead of at the ridge of the slope like you were talking about. And then kind of on the west side, if this area is cleared during phase 1, we're going to have, a bare dirt condition.
That area specifically you're pointing at is not to be cleared during phase 1. I don't think that's cleared until phase 2 or 3.
Yeah, I guess my point is that seems like the intent, but it doesn't seem very clear on this site plan, especially like you said, tree companies can get a little overzealous. So if they see a stake, you know, in the woods, they're gonna be like, that's my limit. So I kind of feel like there needs to be a phase to the limits of clearing as well. And that again occurs in the south side of where the basin is proposed. If this area gets cleared before anything's going on over here, then the erosion control plan isn't going to be effective.
Okay. I mean, we can add to it that we essentially increase the phasing marks as blue ribbon, what have you. We can add that to the narrative so that it's more clear for a contractor and the surveyor who inevitably comes out and does the work, where the clear limits for each phase are.
This is Commissioner Basserman. How much earth is being moved for phase one buildings 1 and 2?
I'll be honest, I don't know that off the top of my head. I know that we provided cut fill analysis for the whole site. I did not break it down by phasing. Area wise and approximate volumes, I know that the land bridge is close to being completed by what we're removing volumetrically from this phase one, the cut or phase two cuts really, because we're not doing a lot of earthwork for phase one. But I won't know material until we're digging whether that material is going to be, you know, a one-to-one adequate of putting it over there, or if they're going to need to import material on site. That's really going to be once we start cutting and start moving material, that's going to become more evident.
So is phase one more of a leveling than anything?
Phase one is really more establishing the perimeter controls, allowing construction access, and then clearing of buildings 1 and 2 of the vegetation that's there. Phase two is really where we get into the earthwork moving.
Gotcha.
This is Commissioner Begemon. Do you have somewhere in the small print tracking pads noted?
Yes. Jamie, if we can go back to sheet one. Or sheet one, sorry, phase one. Thank you. So scroll down if you could, Jamie. I want to look at the entrance of the site. Thank you. I think I can annotate on top of here. So essentially, currently we have. Can I annotate? I cannot. Okay. Coming in here, we have the existing driveway on the left side of where the road is going to be. That driveway is back sloped into the site. I believe it's north of 250 feet long. In practice, with not major earthwork going on, that's going to serve as our initial entrance into the site. It doesn't make a lot of sense to rip that up and put in a anti-tracking pad when you have close to 250 of backgraded driveway existing, and we're not doing major earthworks. Once we get into this driveway road, installing the actual driveway base grade, we are going to be coming in and putting in that construction entrance. You can see it here to protect once we have this first paved section with the utilities coming in this first entrance here. So we do have them. They appear throughout the site as these the grade boxes.
Thank you.
Yep.
This is Commissioner Boda. Can you talk about the water quality volume as well as well, let's just start with the water quality volume pre and post.
Water quality volume really only applies post, but I can. So,
well, here, let me rephrase that then. Can you talk about how you arrived at the amount of water that it would be leaving the site pre-development?
Okay, slightly different question. So essentially, in the stormwater report, what we end up doing is we take the existing survey, we look at the surface materials on site. So in this case, we had the existing survey. We had the known driveways coming into the site. We had the gravel areas. We had essentially emerging brush fields. We had some established woods, and we have the slopes. And in coming into HydroCAD itself, which is the program we use for running these scenarios, you put in not only what sort of material is over a specific area, but what the slope of that area is. So for the site, you end up running this by square foot, but you come in and you enter all the different materials, and then we get the NOAA Atlas 14 data for the site-specific location, and are able to run the two of those together, and that gives us our existing conditions volumes coming off this site or being generated by the site. The post development,
just a clarification before you go to post. So you have ground cover, which included differentiated for the gravel, brush, woody, any grassy areas.
Yeah.
And then the variety of slope on the existing site. And did you use soil surveys, or I guess the
hydraulic soil groups?
Yes.
Or the NC, yeah. So on top of all of that, when you're entering in your surfaces, as you guys know, that NCRS soil groups, you end up having A, B, C's, and D's. So based on that NCRS data, we're able to get a decent estimation of what the actual infiltration rate on site is going to be for stormwater, what the delay is for peak flow, and when you get sheet flow coming to concentrated flow, and you're able to estimate based on that information and the slopes, not only what the delay in a storm reaching, in our case, the middle of the valley, the Southern Valley wetland location, but we were able to run that estimate for the greater 14-acre watershed as well, to figure out water coming into the site from off-site, feeding that northern wetland.
Commissioner Boda, if you would find it helpful, I can screen share. They have provided a summary table of peak flow and volume existing, proposed, and change.
Yes, that would be helpful. Thank you. Okay, and now that we have that, can you talk about post?
Yep. So post follows a very similar process, except now instead of what's existing, we are looking at what's proposed. So that includes all of our cut and fill slopes, the road surfaces, obviously, the buildings, all of which are assumed to have a zero infiltration rate on them. And then we end up taking that information based on where that's draining. So multiple watersheds. Obviously, what's coming being directed into our stormwater basin becomes one watershed, feeding the northern basin, a different watershed, or not northern basin, the northern wetland, feeding a different watershed. That isn't being collected and is going to the south would be another watershed, and we're able to run that through the program as well. We always assume on that a 5-minute accumulation time, which is the worst case scenario. Essentially, it's saying when the storm starts, we're already receiving water. There's not really a delay on the impervious surfaces. So we run all that through the watershed that feeds into the basin, our stormwater basin. We then actually physically model the basin based on what the areas are at certain elevations, and we create outlet control structures to mimic what we're proposing. So in our case, literally built an outlet control structure to be a vertical box with 2 6-inch holes in it at certain elevations, a grate surface on the top, and an outflow of a 24-inch pipe, and allow the model to take the water as it comes into the basin, as it's building up, and how it's going to route through the basin. As we do have a sand filter, that was also modeled as a additional, essentially a trench, with the limiting factor being a 0.2 inch per hour infiltration rate, which is what's the commonly accepted infiltration rate for sand. So essentially, that's our limiting factor there, is we're saying we're only taking 0.2 inch an hour as it passes through the sand to get to this outlet control underflow. And so having those two things in the basin has allowed us to appropriately model how this basin will handle storms up to and including the 100-year storm, with allowing storm flows to route through it. In this particular situation, because of the 14-acre watershed, we did model the northern wetland as a basin. We don't want to take credit for it. We're not trying to take credit for it as offsetting our numbers. When designing this, our office's approach is always our site should contain our site's storms. In this particular case with the 14-acre watershed, if we were only reducing peak flows, having the northern basin alone, we would be able to, I say northern basin, the northern wetland act as a basin. We'd be able to ignore the site and let all of our stormwater free discharge because there's that much of a peak flow delay in the larger storms. But that's not, engineering wise, it's not an ethically sound approach. And that's why we that's why we do look at just our 7-acre site and making sure that our changes to our 7-acre site are offset by our stormwater design to the maximum extent possible. And we do see that we have a reduction for all storms with this basin design addressing our changes to our site.
Mr. Georgino, this is Commissioner Goplowski. In my recollection of walking the site last summer, I recall a significant amount of ledge on the property and a significant amount of water flow. What is in your plans? I didn't see where you're going to be removing a significant amount of ledge. Is that correct?
I don't have boring data, but there will be ledge removal. That is correct.
Okay. And what do you have any idea what the impact would be on the land after that removal?
I mean, if it's ledge, true ledge, fairly minimal. We'd have to there would have to be back grading from the top of the slope. But if it's true ledge, cutting out the ledge through mechanical means is fairly uninvolved in terms of long-term impacts, other than the fact that you've removed materials. It essentially would allow, by Branford's regulations, instead of specifically behind buildings 6, 7, and 5, it would allow us most likely to, instead of a retaining wall, utilize a 5-to-1 or a 1-to-5 slope as outlined in the regulations, which would provide a cost and a more natural looking grade modification system there. In terms of if we're trying to establish lawn, it would most likely result in the need for an over excavation so that we can get at least a foot, if not more, of material on top to really be able to establish a lawn healthily on top of that ledge. If it is true ledge where it's solid rock.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Boda, can you go back to, Jamie, can you go back to the southern basin? And then zoom in. Is there?
Sorry.
Yeah.
What was it you wanted to see specific?
I was just, it looked like, I don't know if there was a berm or something. It was labeled A. Nope. I think you were, oh yeah, that map would work too, I think. If you zoom, you're gonna have to zoom way in. I think it looked like it was in the maybe bottom lower corner of that basin. I don't know. It would just look like there was maybe a berm or something that was labeled A, and I was wondering what it was earlier when Mr. Georgino, you were presenting, but I didn't
maybe
want to
looking at
you.
the temporary sediment trap detail.
I'm not. I thought it was the basin. No, not the detail. It was on the map itself.
Try sheet 1 or 2, Jamie. I'm not sure specifically what would have been labeled A without seeing it.
I was trying not to interrupt.
I see the A. It's right there.
Was it
That
this?
course, yeah. Nope. Jamie, go to the left, like center of your screen. You'll see
Oh,
the A.
Yeah, there it is.
Yep.
Thank you.
So that corresponds with the cross section AA on the right side of the sheet. So this cross section here follows. There's another A that goes across the basin that follows that line across to show not only the outlet control structure but the evolution or elevation, sorry, inside the basin for various storm events.
Commissioner Begmon, this is question. Do those storm calculations take into account this over whether it's like the 100-year storm? Is that volume only, or does it also look at volume over a certain amount of time? Because as we're getting storms that are briefer in duration, but with heavier rain amounts and with the filtration of 0.2 inch an hour in your sand filter, are calculations run on like really heavy, fast storms versus, 10 inches over 5 days versus 10 inches over 1 day?
So the 100-year storm is defined based on kind of an involved question. So Connecticut standards, and I believe this is also true in the 2024 manual, is based on the 100-year storm is a 24-hour storm. So while there are more intense, for instance, Berlin had I think it was a 500-year storm last year, that only lasted 15 minutes. They got, I believe it was close to 4 inches of rain in 15 minutes, which is a lot of rain, intensity wise. But the standards that we're designing around for these storms are a 24-hour storm. And so how these are actually run through the program is we literally get raw data from NOAA for the site-specific location. We go and we give their GPS information to NOAA, and they provide us data that quite literally NOAA updates this data per storm. So anytime we go get this data, it is the most up-to-date, taking effect the real readings that they've been getting in the area. And it provides not just a intensity and a duration, but it also gives us enough data to create synthetic curves with the phase-in of how typical storms progress with a more gradual fade-in. Really, the center of the storm, you're going to be seeing your most intensity, your highest downpour. Typical storms come in, you get rain starting, you end up with middle of the actual storm is where you're getting a lot of your high intensity rains, and then it peters out towards the end with more gradual rain subsiding into the end of the storm. So for all of the year storms, they're all based around a 24-hour reading. So I'm going to be completely honest. I am drawing a blank on what the 24-hour 100-year storm is. It's so in this case, a 100-year storm for 24 hours is approximately 8.10 inches of rain, but the program takes it going how the rain phases in over that period based on NOAA's data.
Commissioner Begmon, thanks. It's helpful. I was laughing because
Scroll back up, Jamie. That curve right there is how NOAA's graph ends up looking at this with rainfall depth versus time. So obviously we're getting the center section where you see around that 12-hour mark where it shoots up. That's the highest intensity in the shortest amount of span, where you're getting several inches of rain within a 2-hour window, and then it peters off on the back end.
This is Commissioner Boda. Can you play out with the proposed, well, first, the proposed sediment and erosion control and the basins, and then later with the stormwater treatment for, I know that they're designed for the 100-year, but we have, you just mentioned Berlin, we saw in Oxford and Monroe, in some places that 500-year storm. Can you describe to us the water flow during those two? So one for during construction, and then one description for the system is in place and working as it should.
So I'm gonna start out with the easier one, which is once the system's in place and working as it should. Essentially, during that 24-hour 100-year storm, you would see water falling, the roadways collecting through a series of catch basins. The pipes themselves are designed to handle the volume for 24-hour storm or 25-year storm by code. So that 25, you would see ponding as the catch basins hit capacity. So when you're getting this 100-year storm, there would be a delay with water getting to this basin. However, once the water, essentially there's a backlog, water will get to the basin, continue to feed in through where you see it's written riprap B, but there's the inlet pipe from the Coltex system. Water would continue to flow in, feeding into this basin while it slowly fed out through the bottom and through the outlet control structure. So during that storm, water levels would quite literally rise to the point that the outlet control structure is utilizing its top grade in that 100-year storm. You'd see your maximum velocities coming out both through the bypass to the slightly to the west. If you pan up a little bit, Jamie. So that riprap apron B, that's from the northern wetlands. So we would see heavier flows coming through, hitting this riprap that is sized appropriately for the maximum velocity of the pipe. Essentially, in both these scenarios, the northern wetland and the basin itself, the pipes would be limiting the flow exiting the site. So there would be water detained temporarily both in the northern wetland and in this basin with a metered release. Essentially, what you'd be seeing for the 100-year storm is a 50% reduction or more in peak flow exiting the site. And so, given that nothing downstream is changing, in one of those major storms, you'd be seeing essentially half the cross-sectional area at any given location of what the channel flow is as we progress further away from the site. So that's the easier one, is once it's up and operational, essentially, water is going to pond and be metered, released out of the site. The harder one is what happened.
So before you jump to the harder one, it sounded to me like you were describing the 100-year storm.
Correct. Yeah.
And my question was for the 500. Those, I understand that that's not what the regs are. It's not what you're designing for. But I'm curious, as a matter of, we've now seen these events happen in the state a few times this year. So I'm curious what it would look like on the ground with a 500-year event.
So that's 500 years they're catastrophic. Nothing is designed to this, to a 500-year storm. Whether this site is completed or not, I would not accurately be able to tell you what I would expect to happen. I haven't run a model for a 500-year storm. It would be outside of design ramifications, and I believe the impacts on this site would be the least of the town's problems. Looking at the whole of the site, a 500-year storm it's catastrophic. I mean, look at Seymour, Derby, and what they got this year. That even major municipal throughways were not able to handle that storm that topped outside of a 100-year storm. They're catastrophic, and there's no polite way to say it. It's a lot of water.
I guess I'm wondering, we saw, I'm assuming we all saw a lot of the footage, and there were a number of places where, so 34 got ripped off of its banks, and it looked like it was because the water had just, the pipe obviously couldn't take it, and so the water just went around, which led to the road getting ripped out. And I don't know. I'm guessing. I'm wondering if in a scenario with that volume of water moving that quickly, if it would simply overtop or if it would just kind of destroy some of these systems.
So I have not run the model. I know as we go north of the 100-year storm, closing in towards the 200-year storm, you would start to see the emergency spillway of the basin becoming utilized. That you would be getting increased flows out of that. I believe that I had run this system for a back-to-back 200-year storm, and in a back-to-back and that's essentially saying that once you hit the 24-hour mark of a 100-year storm, sorry, a back-to-back 100-year storm, once you hit the end of that 24-hour period, you start a new storm event. And when I ran that for these two, both this basin was able to address it appropriately, and the northern wetland, with what we're doing to it, was also able to appropriately address it without overtopping. Both of them still had a foot of freeboard, but getting to a 500-year storm of a 24-hour variety, I am not sure how this would handle it. Now, if it was something like Berlin experienced, where we got a 500-year storm in a very short amount of time, volume wise, I feel both of these systems would handle that. A 24-hour storm is a significant amount of water, and I'm not sure how this would address that. That's outside of standard design parameters and regulations, for that matter.
This is Commissioner Begman. Unless Commissioner Boda has other questions on this part, I have a question. Okay. So when you were talking about the ponding of the water, are you talking about the ponding or pooling of water in the northern wetlands and in that basin that will be created, or are you talking about elsewhere on the site?
So essentially, in all rainfall events, water's going to pond in the lowest points. That's what water wants to do. It wants to seek its level and get as low as possible. So in all storm events, there will be ponding in both the basin and the northern wetland. Mr. Logan addressed the hydrology of the northern wetland a little bit later, but you would see that. In terms of on-site, per code, all of the pipes are designed to handle flows for up to the 25-year storm without a hiccup. Beyond that, you would start to see water essentially ponding down near buildings 3 and 4. And what we have done is we've essentially lowered the grade and created a spillway as water that ponds here and was not adequately being handled would be allowed to blow by swale and down into the Jamie, can you allow me to annotate? Oh, I think I got it. Okay. So as water ponded down around the low point, which is these two here, right? We then have this swale and lowering the grade here that as water builds up, it would essentially, it would straight up overtop this curb. And before it hit these buildings would be entering into this swale, overtopping this curb, bypassing, coming down this much more shallow than a 3-to-1 slope here. I think this is closer to a 5-to-1 slope coming down here, and then bypassing by the site if there was to be a backup. And that is addressed within the models.
Commissioner Begman, so I'm thinking about that building 4. And if there's pooling around building 4, which is going to have grass and perhaps fertilizer, et cetera, what are the chances that it's going to go northward into, I know there's a berm between that and the wetlands, but my concern is how are you going to prevent contamination of that wetland if in a storm that pools? So
it's a combination of two things. One is dilution's the solution. I mean, across the board, not something people like to hear, but most facilities that have wastewater are dumping something along the wastewater, and it's about making sure you dump enough water for whatever you're dumping because there's a part per million threshold for everything. in a storm where you're getting that level of water, where you're going to be having water flowing outwards and beyond, um, it's a lot of water. I think that the fertilizer is a negligible concern. It would, in theory, just to play the scenario out, if we had water that was able to back up past the high point here and here and flow into the northern wetland. Uh, in the 200 or in the 100-year storm, within 18 hours, that those fertilizers, nitrogens that were suspended in water would have passed through this pipe and gone beyond and off the site and carried essentially into the ocean in like 2,000, 3,000 feet or so. In terms of
So just Commissioner Begum, so it's not going to go north into that other wetland, you don't think?
No, it's all designed to continue
Southward.
to pass southward.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I'm not sure how to clear that, Jamie. I can try.
Mr. Georgina, this is Commissioner Boda. I think that this probably isn't you. I'm just wondering who is going to talk about prudent and feasible alternatives and why building 4 is there at all.
That would be Doug Anderson. If we're done with me, we can move on to the other experts. If we want to address all the engineering stuff while I'm holding the floor.
I think maybe in the interest of time, given the discussion,
Yeah.
might be beneficial to move on.
Okay, understood.
Not to say there's no more questions necessarily.
I'll open it up to the commission real quick. Would you like to hear from your soil scientist or project management first?
Let's try soil scientist.
You got it.
All right, that would be me, George Logan, for the record. Good evening, everyone. So I'll try to be as succinct as possible because I think most of the benefit is when commissioners ask questions and then we can be a little more specific. So just to kind of give you a very quick synopsis of my involvement, as you know, you have a report that was revised from the previous one. It's dated September 10th, 2024. It's the wetlands assessment, summary of findings, and what it goes through is to kind of give you a description of ecological communities, the functions and values of the existing wetlands, and to discuss a little bit about the impacts and mitigation. And if I can share my screen somehow, I will share this one right here. Okay. You can probably see this, I hope. So this is, can everyone see it?
Yes.
I guess. All right. So this
I got
is
a blank screen.
blank screen. Okay. How about now? No? I'm sharing my screen and no.
GIS map, is no one else seeing it?
I see it.
I see it.
I see it.
I
All
see
right.
it.
I
Might
see
take a
it.
little while to wake up, I guess. Anyway, so this is the site. The site is in red outline, and what you see here in this interesting purple color is more or less the wetlands that we're talking about. The northern wetland that we're calling, as you can see, a wetland 1 in the report, and the southern wetland we're calling wetland 2A and 2B. 2A is more of the sort of a watercourse flooded area, and the 2B is the more or less the offsite, whereas in the open space. What I did also put here is this little wetland expansion that happened in July. And as you know, the original delineations were done quite some time ago by Scott Stevens of Soil Science and Environmental Services back in 2009 or so. So when I first looked at the site, I thought those were substantially correct. And in the meantime, what has happened since Scott delineated the wetlands, this little extension evolved, and it was mostly involving over the time since the foundation, the building that was in this particular location was removed. and sort of allowed the the wetland to expand. And so this was expanded by about 7,000 square feet or something in that area. As you probably have heard from me before, and I'm going to go to this wonderful little photograph, 1934, where everything in Connecticut was more or less agriculture or pasture. The limits of the site are probably, this is probably close to the northern portion, and obviously here's the southern portion here. And then this is probably a better rendition of what it looked back in 1965. I guess what I'm trying to say here, and you've heard this before, is, as they say, this is a very technical term, that this site has been disturbed 6 ways to Sunday. You see the meat packing areas here. You see other kind of disturbance that has happened. And one thing that I want to point out, which is going to come into discussion later when we talk about Wetland 1 and how we're using it in part for our through flow, mostly from our larger watershed. This is where Wetland A was at that time. You can kind of see this grainy area. And this building and the foundation were basically acting as a dam. So the hydrology of this wetland has evolved and it has been manipulated over the years, which is part of the reason why probably all the trees that were there, the shrubs were killed, and now you have basically, for the most part, 2/3 or more of this wetland is a Phragmites marsh. And that's because of basically the dam that was created by the foundation of this building right here. And how they move the water around, I'm not sure. So there has been some past land use, and you can see this in 1965, and here's 1986. Again, the building's still there. You can still see Wetland 1 here, other activities, and then, of course, things have changed since then. So all the wetlands on the site have been disturbed to some extent. That doesn't mean that they're worthless or they don't provide functions. Obviously, they do. So the northern wetland is a combination of emergent and scrub shrub for the most part, has a little bit of a forested component. As you've probably read the report, you know that there's actually a little abandoned well somewhere just off the site, maybe right about here. So there is some discharge that happens. Probably that was used during the agricultural time for agricultural uses. And so there is a groundwater discharge function to this wetland, not so much in the other portions of the wetland. These wetlands have also been manipulated. Obviously, this is basically a dugout ditch. We had a foundation and pavement over here. So overall, if you look at the functions and values of these wetlands, they don't really provide what we call a lot of principal functions. I think wetland A1, which is in the northern portion, does provide the groundwater recharge discharge function that we talked about. But also because of the kind of wetland that it is, it's also a sediment toxic and pathogen retention wetland as far as a principal function. And of course, there's some uses off-site. And so this wetland does clean water as it comes through the watershed from developed uses within its watershed. So as far as impacts are concerned, and before I get into mitigation, we talked about the northern permanent impact, and we have the southern impact, and the permanent ones together are these two numbers, 1759 and 1825. You add those two together. Then we have additional temporary impacts, and these are wetlands that are going to be impacted, and then they're going to be restored back to something that I believe is going to be better than what's there under existing condition, and that's another 6,089 square feet. And then our mitigation, and I know that Jamie just produced the table that I saw for the first time today. She has a slightly different way of looking at it, and that's fine. I think the numbers are pretty close. What I said in my report as far as the mitigation, because I know there is a guideline in your regulations about a 1.5 to 1 minimum, which is It's not unique in Branford. There's other towns that use the same one. I'll give you one other one. Bloomfield does exactly the same thing. But if you looked at the permanent wetland impact compared to the wetland habitats to be created, you have about a 2.4 to 1 ratio. But if then you include the temporary impacts to wetlands, and those are factored in, you have about a 1.53 to 1. And I think Jamie came up with a little less than 1.5. Now, that does not factor the stormwater detention basin, and I'm going to show you that in a moment. Let's see. So you probably saw that I created a few little plans here. Uh, Zach provided some scaled plans for me, and then I was able to kind of show you a little bit about what's going on as far as what we're restoring and what we're creating. So this is the northern enhancement creation restoration area, a combination thereof. You can see where plants are being put. I have all the planting materials here, although I also have tables. I have planting zones with elevations specifically to what you would expect as far as hydrology after things are done. Now, while we're here, let me address one of the questions that has been floated out there by your staff and also by the third-party reviewer, and that had to do with, hey, you're using this wetland as a temporary detention basin during all storms, and is that going to affect the wetland? And that's a legitimate question, and I know that your third-party reviewer commented that this is not something that the stormwater quality manuals, the first one or the second one, recommend. And first, yes, that's absolutely right. But I usually say you have to look at the site-specific conditions. If this was a mature forested wetland, I would say, yep, we will probably not want to do this. But again, as I explained before, this is a wetland that has already been hydrologically impacted. So, okay, so during a 1 year storm, which is a storm that happens more often than not, um, uh, Zach told me that we're going to be raising the elevation of this wetland by a little less than a foot if it's full, right? If it's full to the brim. And then we're going to have that water hang around for 16 or so hours. And I'm giving you some rough numbers, I don't have the table in front of me. So the question is, well, what will that do to the wetland? And obviously, the majority of storm, 90% of the storms are about an inch, or 1.3 as the new manual tells us, or less. So many storms are a lot less than that, so it has less of a amplitude to the flooding that will happen. So, and this is something that I've looked at, and I could provide literature. There's, I had to actually um, discuss this with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers many, many years ago, and came up with some research. And apparently, from what I was told, they were using that research for years after that, which was like, oh, that's nice. And that was done by looking at research for specific to wetland types and vegetation types, like red maple. How much flooding would a red maple, which is a common one in Connecticut in a wetland, would withstand as far as water? And data would tell you that they can be flooded by a foot or so for more than 24 hours and without an impact of the wetland. So what happens with this additional water that we might be having here during these storms, and again, that's not with every storm, it's just the design storms that we're looking at, is that it will only bring the static elevation a little further up, and over time the wetland will adapt. So this is not, if there's going to be a change, it's not going to be something that's going to happen overnight where, now we have a destroyed wetland. Now, wetlands do adapt. Vegetation senesces and vegetation comes in that adapts, has a better adaptation to flooding. For instance, give you an example. Phragmites is the major plant in the center of this area in the lower spots. If there's a little more water, Phragmites is not going to be very happy. Guess what's going to be happy? Cattails will be happier. they can take more inundation for a longer period of time. So that's just an example. There will be an adaptation, and over time the wetland will adapt. And so you still will have a wetland. You might have a slightly different kind of wetland assemblage of vegetation. So if this was a forested wetland, I'd be more concerned. But because this predominantly is a wetland that's an emergent wetland with a perimeter of scrub shrub, which has actually adapted to the additional water that has had over the years, which has actually happened here. So back when, before, before say this turned into a more developed area back in the 50s and 60s, this wetland was a lot different. And then it's adapted, and we have a wetland here. So I don't think that that's going to be an issue. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you is this. Let's see. So this was the other little plan that I came up. Again, there's obviously, I've also included very detailed planting implementation notes, and I have the table separately also, but I thought this might be a way to kind of put everything in one spot. One thing I'll show you here, and again, even though we're showing this as a green area that's going to be vegetated and it's going to in part and be a wetland, we're not taking this into account. Now, I always look for an opportunity to create wetland habitats. And so, as you can see, Zone A, and these little areas we'll explain in a moment, is saturated and shallow inundation, and I give you the elevations for that in this particular spot. So what I'm asking, and which doesn't show in any other plans except this little plan that you see here, is that we do a little bit of a 6-inch depression, so, or maybe even a little more. This is elevation 77. And as you can see, these two depressional areas are not within the area that's occupied by we'll call it the sand filter underdrain. So I'm not going to mess up with that. But when the basin fills up during a storm, it's going to leave some residual water back here. And so I'm creating a little bit of a wetland because for the rest of the time, we can assume that the bottom of the basin will have some wetland characteristics, but with the introduction of this sand filter underdrain, that's probably going to be more moist than not. But again, I saw an opportunity here, so I wanted to create a little something. So this is not something we're putting into our numbers for the 1.5 or thereabouts of wetland impact to wetland creation. All right, so that's kind of running through my involvement, and I did have a couple of other things that I wanted to answer for Jamie, and maybe we can talk about him a little more. There was a question about to add mowing height for basin maintenance, and I'd say anything from 4 inches and above is fine. So don't get closer to 4 inches, and for the reason for that is you can burn vegetation, specifically in areas where you've put a conservation seed mix that has some pollinator value. You don't want to basically kill those plants in the basin. There was another question regarding when the vegetation would be planted, and I know there's a little bit of a, there's the phasing plan and there's this plan, and so how do we blend the two? And that's a discussion that we can get into a little more. But basically, the issue is you have two planting periods for vegetation generally when you're planting, and that is spring and fall, or mid-spring, say. If in a wet year you don't want to be planting too early, so you do not want to plant emergence in the fall. So your herbaceous species do not go in the fall unless you want to sit there and water. And I don't think anyone wants to do that. So the clarification, I think, is that you can do all the planting during the spring season, we'll call it that, or if you can do planting only in the fall because of whatever else is happening on the site, You do the woody species in the fall, and then you have to wait for the next spring to do the herbaceous species. But seeding can take place mostly at any time. You have a little more of loss in the fall, obviously, than you do in the spring with a growing season. So you have two planting periods, and I think that's it for now. And I know there's some other questions that might pop up, but this is my contribution quickly for this moment so that we can have other people say other things. Thank you.
Mr. Logan, this is Commissioner Boda. I'm confused. I have to admit. So you've said that we're looking at 1759 and 1829 of permanent fill and 6,089 of temporary. And then you talked about a 2.4 to 1 ratio of permanent or I guess mitigation for the permanent impacts and 1.5 to 1 for temporary impacts. I'm wondering where that 2.4 and the 1.53 is coming from. Like, are you proposing to create wetlands somewhere? Because it looks like maybe mitigation in the northern wetland, but are you proposing to create? And then let me just finish. And then in this southern wetland, you just said that you're not taking credit for the basin. I'm confused about what is mitigation versus what is the is these detention basins, or are they just totally the same?
So let's take out the major detention basin that's in the southern portion completely out of the equation. That's like on top of everything. So we're not including that as part of our restoration and creation. So there is some creation that's happening, which means there are wetlands that were not there before, or we wouldn't be able to say we have a 1.5 to 1 ratio. And then there are wetlands that were disturbing during the construction but then we're restoring them. And that happens both in the northern and in the southern one. I think, I don't know, Zach, do you want to opine on that if you're still available?
I can screen share the site plan that kind of shows the areas that might be
Thanks.
helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, I am still here to opine.
Okay. There we go. That's what I was looking for.
So as we look at this color code wise, the orange are areas of permanent wetland impact that I hate to use the term remove, but that will cease to be wetlands as part of this project. Those are those orange areas. The blue areas are areas of temporary disturbance that we are then going to be restoring, enhancing, what have you. The green areas, and this is where the basin conversation comes into effect, that are going to be created as functional wetlands. Now, there is a discussion as to whether the basin should or should not be counted as wetlands, and that's where I think this confusion is coming from. That basin, it's going to functionally be a wetland in the long run. We all know that's the ultimate life cycle of a basin is it becomes a wetland through natural processes or if it was intended to. Town staff does not like us to count that, so that's why while we are intending to functionally help it along to become a wetlands, we have not tried not to include it in these numbers. If the commission wants us to count it, we can adjust appropriately. Now, on this sheet, if we go over to the far right, Jamie, there's a table.
Yeah, right. There you go.
Yep, that has quite literally all of the impacts, and they're all corresponding to the labels of the various areas. So our proposed impacts for the permanent is that approximate 3,584 of the permanent impacts, and those are those orange areas. The temporary impacts, they're all labeled, but it comes to a total of 6,089 square feet worth of temporary impacts, and those are all areas that we are planning to restore their wetlands function to, enhance, what have you. For our total impacted areas, so that's permanent and temporary, for that 9,673. Now, our first section, the mitigation areas, and the next area down, these are all those areas that we are the temporary impacts, or these mitigation areas. So again, you see that same 6,089 and 6,089 because these are the areas that overlap. We are then proposing creation, those green areas throughout the site, to create 8,704 square feet of wetlands without including the basin. If you include that basin, that we'd be creating an addition, add 5,000 to that number. But we're essentially looking at our total impacts, permanent and temporary, is that 9,673 square feet, and our total mitigation areas, that's wetlands and restorations, of 14,793 square feet worth of wetlands. And that's where the 1.5 number comes from, is dividing those two for a ratio.
This is Commissioner Boda. And Mr. Georgina, then do you have for those green areas, both in the northern proposed wetlands and the southern one, do you have perk data for those areas showing that the water is not going to drain off, and that it can in fact be turned into a wetland?
Mr. Logan can opine on this a little bit more. He's the wetlands creation expert. But in my understanding is in creation of these, we essentially introduce the right soil composition to these areas and go through a compaction process to ensure that there's going to be the needed moisture retention on site. But George, please feel free to, I don't want to step on your toes. Wetlands are your deal.
Well, wetlands are my deal. So on the northern portion, obviously, what we're doing is we're taking, in the green areas, we're taking and expanding, which basically we're lowering the elevation of the existing land there in order to more or less mimic what's already there. So we're going to have, and if you have the grading plan, you'd see that, where you'd have the elevations kind of mimic what's already in the wetland. There you go. So that's, you can see there's a little bit of a depression. So there's a bit of excavation that's happening in these green areas. When it comes to the other areas further down the slope, which is the southern, again, we're concentrating water there. These are wetlands that are temporarily impacted and then reconstituted, if you will. So we're kind of at the same kind of elevations as we were before. So in all cases, I have no concern as far as meeting the hydrology. Most often what happens, if anything, we end up with something that's slightly wetter than we thought it was going to be, rather than the other way around. So that's kind of the reality in these areas. So I have no concern that we're not going to meet the appropriate hydrology, even in the detention basin. And that's the reason for doing those little depressional areas, is to knowing where the groundwater is under existing conditions, because it's obvious from the surrounding area and where the wetlands are and where we see hydrology as far as those elevations. So even within the larger detention basin, we're going to have immediately, if my little plan of these depressional areas is instituted, which I hope it is, we're going to have immediate wetlands there, which is why I'm planting them. And over time, as Zach said, the hydrology of this area will be changed. Now, it might not be wetland right over the little filter, but that's has another reason for that, and that is to promote, the stormwater quantity and quality, renovation capabilities of this basin.
And Mr. Logan, I know you have quite a bit of expertise. So just clarify, when you say that you're basing it off of the hydrology, and my question was about perk rates for that area. I'm asking, partially because I like to make sure that we have data that verifies, quantifiable data that verifies that this in fact can be made into a wetland. And also from having been on the commission as long as I have, and very recently, we had an issue with a proposed wetland that failed and is now supportive upland. So I, at this moment, am not feeling particularly, I would like some data that verifies it, that is more quantitative than qualitative.
Well, the data is very obvious for anyone to see. All you have to do is go out there and look at where the water sits in the existing wetlands. And so if you emulate the same elevations, you basically are tapping into the groundwater regime for the northern wetland. You're tapping into the groundwater regime for the southern wetland. So I don't need to go out there and do percolation tests because that's not going to tell me anything. All I need to know is where the seasonal high groundwater table is, and I can see where it is on the ground today. And that's basically what we're emulating. Now, I understand that the detention basin might be a little bit of a different scenario, but again, that, in my estimation, from looking at, for instance, look at this. We have some elevations there under existing conditions, if I can read that correctly. I got a 78, and we're basically going to be at about the same place as we are today, maybe a little lower. So that's why I wanted to put those depressional areas, because I know the groundwater is within 1.5 feet of that disturbed area seasonally. That's why I wanted to go another foot down. And also we're concentrating water here, which is always what happens. You basically end up having a little bit of hydraulic mounding happening. And so areas that would become wetter because of the fact that you're not only closer to groundwater, but also because you're concentrating hydrology to these areas by virtue of the fact that you're putting water into the detention basin. So that will be the only question mark in my mind. But again, we're not relying on that for our numbers. And the rest of the areas, I'm overly confident, 100%, that we're going to meet the hydrological needs to create wetlands. And here's another thing too that I can tell you. And this is something that I've done before. And as long as I'm not messing with the hydrologic computations of the engineer who will be chasing me, if I do, one of the things that you will see in the notes that I provided is that I have the ability to make fine adjustments for grading when I'm in the field. So as we're going through, as we're excavating, if I see something different than what I expected there based on my site investigations already, I can make those adjustments in order to meet the state of hydrology that I need. And that I can do because I'm going lower than the inverts of any pipe that's involved, which means I'm not messing up with the hydrology as far as water quantity is concerned and stormwater management.
Thank you. So again, this is Commissioner Boda. Do we have documented the height, the depth to groundwater in these, I can only call it Site 1. I'm looking at the green areas in Site 1, as well as the green areas on the perimeter of Site 2. Is that somewhere in your report?
No, I mean, all you can do is see the pictures, and you can see that as far as the northern area is concerned, the groundwater is at the surface of the wetland, which is why it is a wetland already. And as I said, what we're doing is we're just expanding that elevation along the edges. And so we're going to be in groundwater. And the same thing is happening in the southern area. We know where the groundwater is because we have wetlands there.
This is Commissioner Wasserman. Again, touching on the same issue, any concern of extended drought and what that might do to the level in the groundwater?
Well, wait for next year. Basically, I mean, we're in a drought right now, and I can tell you as a soil scientist digging holes. I can't find groundwater anywhere. It's nowhere to be found. So, but this is an aberration. It's not something that's normal. So, all these systems are based on normal conditions. And when we go into an abnormal condition, such as a drought, which is an abnormal condition, these systems will senesce for a little bit, and then they will pop back up when the hydrology returns and the normal precipitation and groundwater returns, which has happened for millennia.
And this is Commissioner Bassman, and as a follow-up, if we had a continued drought and we don't have groundwater in those areas that we see groundwater today, aren't we inviting the opportunity for basins to take hold?
Okay, so here's the scenario. The scenario is it's time for, I get the call, George, we're ready to do our wetland planting. And I'm looking at the drought monitor and going, nope, we're not doing any wetland planting because I'm in a drought period. So we're going to wait until the conditions return to normal. And then based on normal conditions, which will pop back sooner or later, we're not going to go into an extended drought for a long time. And this is kind of a cyclical thing that happens. And we've experienced droughts before, and some of them even worse than the one that we're experiencing right now in the Northeast. And guess what? Wetlands still exist. So it's a matter of when we do it. So obviously, I'm not going to go be recommending planting when we're in the middle of a drought. That doesn't make any sense. Now, you could plant, and there's language in the notes for that. And we could plant during a sort of normal period when we have good water, and then all of a sudden we're hit with a drought. What do you do then? Well, what the notes say is you water. Sorry, you got to water because you're in the establishment period of this vegetation, and so you want it to take hold, develop root systems more than just the pot that you just put in the ground. So we're going to have to water.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jamie Frederick and the Wetland Agent. I just want to touch base real quick on kind of the areas counted for mitigation and the comment about slight staff disagreement. So historically, the commission has not had a past practice of counting stormwater basins, whether they're wet bottom basins, dry basins, stormwater management areas are not counted as mitigation. So to that end, as the applicant, I thought that the basin, or as the applicant did in their calculations, I thought it was appropriate not to include the basin in the calculation. And then I took it one step further, and essentially this swale feature over here, I thought also wouldn't be appropriate to count as mitigation consistent with the commission's past practice. So we kind of touched on this with the previous application that was withdrawn, but there was never a consensus or decision made. I just want to hop over real quick. I did prepare a memo today. I was waiting because I was wondering if we would get additional materials addressing some of the outstanding comments. And I'm just going to kind of focus in on here. All of these numbers up here come from, this site plan here that we were looking at earlier. And essentially, based on the numbers provided, not counting the basin, the applicant says they're providing 1.5 mitigation for wetland impacts. If you remove that stormwater swale area as well, it drops it down to 1.4. If you were to include the basin, it would be 2.1 mitigation. And at that point, I would imagine you would include the swale too. So this number becomes kind of irrelevant. And then this is just for conceptual content purposes. I provided, if you look at permanent impacts and creation only, the ratio is 2.4 based on the applicant's numbers, and it would be 2.0 based on, I think that number might actually be wrong because that doesn't make sense. But again, the regulation doesn't distinguish between temporary and permanent. So really what we're looking at, assuming the commission is in agreement with past practice, is that the proposed mitigation is currently at 1.4 to 1 instead of 2 to 1. The regulation requires if there's more than 750 square feet of filling, that compensation is required. Since it is not possible to replace a mature functioning wetland or watercourse with a created habitat, wetland or watercourse creation will be at a ratio of at least 2 to 1 in area. The commission may reduce the ratio on a case-by-case basis, but cannot reduce the compensation to a ratio below 1 to 1. Compensation measures should be considered in the following order of priority. 1, restore pre-existing wetland or watercourse. 2, enhance degraded wetland or watercourse to improve functions and values they provide. And 3, create productive wetlands or watercourse resources. So I think this evening it would be beneficial for the commission to provide guidance if there's additional, if you're not satisfied with the mitigation ratio that's currently being provided. I would also identify that creation here is the third option. So there potentially is room for restoration of existing wetland area. I recall in the report it mentioned that there's some debris in the wetland. I'm not sure where that is relative to the areas that are being worked in, but it might be that could be cleaned up a bit. If it's on the northern end of the northern wetland, that might not make sense due to access. And then, so I guess I'll let commissioners weigh in before I say anything else.
This is Commissioner Wasserman. Jamie, of the areas that have been identified for mitigation, is there an area A through F that you've identified as being a good candidate for a restoration activity?
So these are all areas that the applicant has already provided.
Right.
So these are the areas from the map and the table to the right. So in the subdivision that was approved for the property a long time ago, they actually had some of their mitigation on this parcel, which is open space, which at this point has been deeded to the town and is no longer part of the parcel or the application. So they're kind of theoretically maxing out the abilities to do mitigation on the southern end of the site. There could be some additional opportunities available in the northern wetland, whether it's restoration of the existing wetland, enhancement. And I guess to that end, would the commission, I don't know what the vegetation or status of the adjacent upland area to the wetland is here. Would the commission consider enhancement of that area compensation as an enhancement of the wetland?
This is Commissioner Bassman, are you specifically talking about extending area B?
So, I don't know about extending it because of the contours. I guess I'm just wondering, theoretically, but I think so that the applicant has some input to consider for any potential revisions and whatnot. Like I said, there's potential to obviously enhance the existing wetland. That's the first priority. Restore and enhance. So does restore and enhance, from what I can recall, that's always been in a wetland. There has sometimes been outside of a wetland, but that usually goes above and beyond the 2 to 1 ratio. Would you count enhancement adjacent to a wetland in that 2 to 1 ratio? And or there is the ability for the commission to reduce the 2 to 1 ratio. However, I've not seen that happen frequently. The only time I can think of it was when there was a repair being made that was causing wetland impacts. So theoretically, approving the repair was going to have less wetland impact overall.
This is Commissioner Bathroom. Let me go back. We're at this point because you're saying even though it's maybe somewhat unclear regarding temporary or permanent in terms of the nature here, that if in fact past practice says that we don't include basin and swale, then this plan does not meet the appropriate ratio.
I think there's
Is that a summation?
a basis on past practice that the plan may not meet the requirement. So I want you to identify that this evening so they know if that has to be addressed.
This is Commissioner Boda. I would say that has to be addressed. Stormwater is stormwater. That management and the stormwater system is one thing, and wetlands and wetland mitigation areas are separate, and we don't do double dipping. And we also haven't heard why Building 14 has to be there, which could potentially get rid of this problem altogether because it would reduce the amount of fill and maybe bring them to the ratios that they need. And their comment about a showing of cost, right? If they can't do building 4, then there's an economic impact, but the mere showing of cost does not make an alternative not prudent nor feasible. So I'm not inclined to extend a weird exception to this application. We aim to implement our regulations uniformly, fairly and uniformly, and I don't, especially with the build, like I would like to hear what the prudent and feasible alternative analysis. So my answer right now is no.
George Logan has his hand raised, Chairman.
Mr. Logan?
Yes, George Logan to the record. Just a couple of considerations. So I understand all that. And, if we're going to go by the letter of your regulations and also your past practice, yes, we need to look at that. I would agree. However, what I would also say is that typically what you want to do is you want to look on a case-by-case scenario. And in this particular case, the wetlands that we are impacting are of pretty low quality and they're all anthropogenic. I mean, no one can argue that. They're made, man-made. So that's one thing. And the second thing is interesting is wet detention basins are considered regulated areas under your own regulations. So I can't go fill a basin without a permit if it's a wetland basin.
Mr. Logan, can you clarify for us where the state indicates that man-made or anthropogenic water systems do not get the same protections as naturally occurring wetlands or watercourses?
I didn't say that they don't get protection. All I'm saying is that you always have to take into consideration the functions and the values and the disturbance, if you will, that wetlands provide. And of course, I pointed that a man-made detention basin that has a wetland character is regulated by your own regulations. So that's the point. The point is you need to look at what you're taking and not just look at, okay, it's a square footage, but what is that square footage doing? Is it a good square footage or not so good square footage? And can we do something that by taking something that's not a good square footage and making it a better square footage, and should that count a little more maybe than the square footage that was bad or not as
I'm
good?
sorry. Can you point to where that would be with the state guidance that says that? Anything referring to that? Because I like looking at the state's preamble. That is certainly not the purpose of the Inland and Wetlands and Watercourse regulations, there is a need for indispensable and irreplaceable but fragile natural resource, which the citizens of the state of Connecticut are endowed. So,
Sure. Commissioner Boda, I don't need to be argumentative here. All I'm saying that if we couldn't take into account the functions and values of a particular wetland system, then your regulations wouldn't need for me to give you the functions and values. We just call every wetland as being the same. And that is not the case. Everyone knows that. It's just common sense. The certain wetlands are more critical and need to be protected to a much greater degree than others. If that wasn't the case, then we wouldn't be able to fill anything, not even the drainage ditch, which would qualify as a regulated resource. That's all I'm saying. I don't need to be argumentative. I'm just saying you have to balance things out.
This Commissioner Basserman, Jamie, in our regulations, do we have an option other than square footage in this consideration? I thought the only thing we had in there was a quantitative number. We didn't have a qualitative assessment of the function of the wetland in terms of making this decision.
So I mean, the regulation has a requirement that's based on numbers. I think where the interpretation potentially is available is in what you consider compensation, and in whether or not the commission believes it's appropriate to reduce the ratio. It does have a clause for reducing the ratio, which indicates there are rationales where the commission might deem less is appropriate. And like I said, one instance is where there was a repair. It was causing impact and the repair was needed to stop that impact.
This is Commissioner Basserman, but maybe this gets into Commissioner's Boda point that she's made a while ago, which is until you get kind of a prudent and feasible assessment, how can you evaluate whether we're at that point of making a qualitative rather than quantitative judgment on this particular issue?
Yeah. To that end, we do still need to hear the prudent and feasible alternative presentation. We do also need to hear from the peer review. So maybe it's appropriate to table this matter.
It's 9:06.
If it doesn't circle back around, I think it's important that, again, some guidance is at least on the table, even if it's just we're still concerned. So that way the applicant can kind of prepare for the next meeting. And maybe there's something the commission wants staff to research to help address for the next meeting. Yeah.
Well, it's certainly with the amount of time that we've spent on this particular area, it's an area of concern that I'm sure the applicant will want to pay attention to, as well as, the issue of how would we assess this in light of prudent and feasible alternatives. That seems to be a large outstanding issue, as well as I guess there are still some issues that we haven't gone over because the peer review folk haven't had an opportunity to present yet. Do you think it's wise at least to get their input in the remaining time that we have to get maybe a more complete picture of what needs to be prepared for the next meeting? Katie, you have your hand raised?
George Logan had his hand raised.
Oh, I see Katie's hand raised, I think.
No, my hand was raised, and all I was going to say is that we'd be more than happy to look at other opportunities for getting over the threshold as far as the square footage is concerned. I think, yeah, we could look at that for sure.
And I guess the other question that was raised at the beginning is this issue of the stormwater management guide and the conditions under which we might consider the 2024 storm management guidelines as opposed to those that preceded it? And do we need some outside advice on that issue?
Jamie Frederick and the Wetland Agent. I think it would be beneficial to maybe hear if the peer review team has any comments on that regards to their experience in the implementation. And then I can also do some research before our next meeting based on comments made earlier in the meeting. I think we should let the applicant finish up with their alternatives before going over to the peer review. And I do think we should open it up for public comment in case there's anyone present that particularly can't attend the next meeting. So I guess I would ask that we try and run through that quickly based on the time frame we set at the beginning of the meeting.
Yeah, that's a lot to do in the next 10 to 15. I guess the floor is yours, Mr. Logan, unless you want to hand it off to the project manager.
Well, if we're going to be talking about feasible and prudent alternatives, I can try to address that issue, at least from the legal perspective, and Zach and George can step in if there's technical questions that need to have answered. So as part of the application, the applicant did submit 2 alternative developments for the site. They also submitted a feasible and prudent alternative development analysis, which summarized the history of the property as well as the two proposed alternatives. So the first alternative is the 10-lot subdivision application, and that application has been approved by the Wetlands Commission as well as the Planning and Zoning Commission, and that is a valid existing permit, which is the existing conditions on the site. And I raise that because if you do a comparison of the subdivision that's approved and existing versus this application, the wetlands impact on both applications is virtually identical. I know there's been some discussion about the northern wetland and why I think it's building 6 is into that area of the wetlands. So as both Zach and George have stated, that wetland area is a degraded wetland that has foundations in it from prior developments on the property. We're not dealing with a virgin wetland here. We're dealing with a wetland that is disturbed, is low-grade wetland, and has foundations in that area right now. We're also dealing with an area that was approved by the Wetlands Commission for development as part of the 10-lot subdivision. So in developing this current plan, the applicant tried to maintain the impacts that were approved by the Wetlands Commission in the subdivision application with this application. So as far as that's concerned, that was the rationale for locating that building at that particular area. Now, I know there's been some talk about what feasible and prudent is, and I think we can all agree what feasible is, something that can be constructed with sound engineering principles, and I don't think there's any real debate that what's been proposed here is feasible. And then the question really is this prudent? And prudent means, and I know there's been some discussion as to what it means or what the definition is, but under the regulations, prudent is economically and otherwise reasonable in light of the social benefits to be derived from the proposed regulated activity, provided cost may be considered in deciding what is prudent, and further provided a mere showing of expense will not necessarily mean an alternative is imprudent. So when determining whether an activity is both feasible and prudent, the commission can take into consideration the social benefit derived from the proposed regulated activity. As we mentioned at the outset, this application is an application for a 22-unit, age-restricted, 55 and over housing development. I think the commission is on notice that there is a housing shortage and that the creation of new housing is a social benefit for the residents of the town of Branford. And I think there is a benefit to having housing stock that is available to citizens who are 55 and over. So I think the commission can consider that in evaluating whether the application is prudent. The other social benefit to this is that as part of this application, the developer will be working in conjunction with the town to bring sewers to this area. This area is an existing neighborhood. There have been a number of failed septic systems in this area. By allowing this development to proceed and allowing the sewers to be connected, other residents in that area who have failing septic systems will be able to tie into that sewer system. Once again, that is a social benefit, which I think the commission is entitled to consider when evaluating whether that alternative is prudent. Not only is it a social benefit, I think it's a benefit to the wetlands. If you can get a sewer system and a connection to that property and a sewer connection to that entire neighborhood, that is going to prevent the future failure of septic systems, which is going to have an environmental benefit to the property. Just in terms of sheer numbers, Zach Jordina has done an evaluation of the disturbances from a wetlands perspective from both the subdivision application and the proposed 22 unit age restricted development. And the numbers are pretty identical, subject to obviously Jamie's discussion that she had earlier. With regard to the approved subdivision application, that application called for a total site disturbance of 5.26 acres. As part of this 22 unit.
Excuse me, Attorney Lee, Commissioner Goklowski here. You're mentioning the previous approval of the subdivision, and we've had lengthy discussions in previous meetings regarding that particular application. This application that's before us now has no bearing on what the subdivision was approved for. And so I know you like to make reference to it, and I can appreciate that fact, but previous meetings, we listened to previous mentions of that application, and we as the commission, this is a brand new application and it has no bearing on the previous application whatsoever. So, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention if you weren't at the previous meetings.
Jamie?
I appreciate your comment, and with all due respect, I disagree with you because I do think the approved subdivision is relevant to this application for two reasons. One, that subdivision is an approved subdivision, and those impacts have been approved by this commission. So I think when you're evaluating the impacts on this 22 unit proposal, you can very much evaluate that in comparison with the impacts approved as part of the subdivision application. So I think it's relevant as a baseline for this application, for that matter. Two, I think it's relevant when we're considering feasible and prudent alternatives.
What year was that application approved?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I believe it was
2008.
2008. And can you please tell me what is the length of the, how long does that permit last? That permit approval?
Amy Frederick and the wetland agent. Currently it expires, I believe, October of next year. State statutes have been
right extended to 19 years plus another 5 for a total of 24.
It could theoretically be extended if conditions were deemed appropriate by the commission.
So 2020, October 25?
Currently.
Okay,
and we'd be eligible for another 5-year extension to that permit.
I'm not sure it's 5 years, it might be 3, but there is some wiggle room for extension.
Okay. You can keep going. I don't want to hold it.
Yeah. So the first reason I think it's relevant is because it establishes baseline of what is permitted at that property. Second, I think it's relevant because that it is a feasible and prudent alternative that we're showing you as a potential development of that site. And once again, in terms of the feasible and prudent analysis, this is a subdivision application that got approved in 2008. As part of that subdivision application, the applicant had to bring sewers to that site. That development has not occurred since 2008 because it is not economically feasible for the developer to bring the sewers to that site for 10 lots. That is the reason why this plan is before you, and we're seeking approval of 22 units because the developer needs to have a certain number of units in order to justify bringing the cost of the sewers into to the property. So from that perspective, I do think that it qualifies as a feasible and prudent alternative.
Jamie,
Second analysis.
Correct me if I'm wrong, though. The feasible and prudent, the reason it's in a wetland regulation is to try to protect the wetlands that are there. So it's not feasible and prudent. How many buildings can you get? How can you solve the housing problem, et cetera? From our standpoint, it's how do we protect the wetlands that are there? And that's the feasible and prudent I'm looking for.
Right. I don't necessarily agree with that statement. Once again, with all due respect, I'm not going to be argumentative, but I do think that the reason for the language that's feasible and prudent alternative is because it forces the commission to do a balancing act. You're balancing the need and utility and the social benefit of this development on one hand versus the impact to the wetlands on the other. And if you look at your regulations actually require you to do that balancing act. So if you look at section 10.3 of your regulation, that says the commission must consider feasible and prudent alternatives. I don't dispute that that is your obligation under both your regulations and the state statute. However, your regulations then say when evaluating feasible and prudent alternatives, you are to consider the criteria in section 10.2 of your regulations. And your regulations articulate 6 criteria that you're to consider when evaluating whether an alternative is feasible and prudent. And those 6 factors are once again cause you to engage in that balancing act. So it's not simply a question of saying you can do a development that has less impact. No, you have to look at the impact, the social benefit of the project. You have to look at wetlands creation, wetlands mitigation, and you have to take all those factors into consideration when evaluating a feasible and prudent alternative. It's not just a numbers game.
Yeah, we're trying to establish a record that does that balancing act, and I haven't seen that so far.
Well, we just got started.
And Mr. Lee, I have a question. Given the time, I don't think that I need to have an answer tonight, but I'm going to put it to you and your team. You asserted that the bringing in of sewers will be an environmental benefit to that area. And so I'm going to look for something in your reporting from qualified experts that can actually address that. So if you're going to make that claim, someone from your team who has the appropriate background needs to back it up with files. Oh, you're not talking about it tonight?
No, fair enough. I think the thought process was if you could have sewers in that area, it would eliminate septic systems. And I think the septic systems pose a far greater impact to the environment and the wetlands than a sewer system. So
Mr. Lee, we can all certainly understand the desire to kind of use common sense, but we are a regulatory body that must deal in engineering and science, and you have experts. You certainly have the staff that can address it, and as an attorney, that's not your place. So it's a fine argument to make. I would just want that your experts, that if that is a line of argument that you're going to use and claim as to how it is a benefit that falls under 10.2, that it must be part of the record and it must be attested to by people with the appropriate background. That's all. And it's 9:25, so I don't want to have them try to do that tonight. I definitely have paperwork on it already.
Fair enough. I will have them opine next time we meet.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent, I just want to interrupt real quick and just say, I did actually encourage the applicant to add the subdivision approval as a prudent and feasible alternative to this application because it is an approved plan and it is less impact. So I thought it was appropriate that they address why they don't find it prudent and feasible. So I do think it's appropriate to be referenced in that capacity in this application.
Do we have time to squeeze in at this point? I know it's 2 hours already to squeeze in the peer review folk to hear what they have to say as it might help round out what the applicant needs to be prepared with for the next meeting. Any objection? All right. Who's here from the peer review team?
I can chime in on that. Kyle Hobbert from CLA Engineers. Also with me, thank you. And also with me is Molly Ahern from our office, who did the review regarding the wetlands. I perform more of the civil and the stormwater review of the project. One thing I can address off the bat, you guys had just mentioned the use of the stormwater quality manual, the 2024 version versus the old version. The 2024 version was implemented and effective this March of this year, this spring. In that manual, it allowed projects that were at preliminary design, essentially 50% design, prior to that date, to continue using the older 2004 manual. And the applicant has stated that they were beyond that preliminary phase of design at the effective date of the new 2024 manual. And I think that's evidenced by they had submitted the previous application more or less, I think, right around or after that effective date. So per those guidelines and per the stormwater quality manual, they are still allowed to use the old 2004 version of the manual for their guidance and design. And with that, we have gone through these plans. We have reviewed them a couple of times, a couple of iterations from the previous application, as well as twice with this current application. To date, the applicant has addressed a majority of our comments that we have provided. A couple, we did provide a letter earlier today with some minor comments regarding the latest revision to the plans. One comment on there is regarding the volume of runoff, and there's an increase in volume leaving the proposed development downstream. The applicant has asserted in their letter and in their calculations that the increase in volume does not have a negative impact downstream or any adverse impact downstream to the channel downstream. I've reviewed their calculations and what is occurring downstream, and I would concur with that statement from them. Additionally, there are a couple other outstanding items regarding the northern wetlands. In the response letter from the applicant, they had indicated that Mr. Logan would be providing additional comments in a response letter. They had also indicated regarding the alternatives analysis, we had brought up the consideration of moving or eliminating building 4, which is in the wetlands, as part of the alternatives analysis. And the applicant had indicated that there was pending additional information coming in the response letter. We have not received that information at this point, so those would be still some outstanding issues that are out there.
This is Commissioner Bassman. Mr. Hubbard, you raised issue also with this berm at the detention basin. Is there any further information from DEEP on that?
They, to my knowledge, have not provided any additional information from DEEP on that. But I believe they did say that they would consult with DEEP, and if a dam permit was required from DEEP, that they would acquire it.
So that's still to be determined?
That would be a DEP jurisdiction, and I don't know that DEP is weighed in if they would classify that dam or not, or require a permit for it. But we have not received confirmation either way.
Okay.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent, the applicant has their hand raised.
Mr. Georgiana?
Georgina, it's fine. It's regularly mispronounced. I'm not upset. In practice, Deep's dam determination is contingent on our approval here. Deep's not going to review a document that hasn't gone through. We suspect that it will end up going through Deep's dam process. There's no doubt in our mind that this should classify as one, but that process is after the fact versus before the fact.
Gotcha. Thank you. Any other questions for CLA from the commission?
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent, I do want to identify that I believe we're at the end, essentially, of the funds available. So if the commission wants the peer review team to review those outstanding documents, information that they were just referencing, and or attend the next meeting, I think that additional funds are going to have to be considered. Is that something the commission is looking for?
Commissioner Basserman, it's kind of hard to know whether we're going to need additional consultation, as there's still outstanding items that are due. We don't know the nature of what that response will be. Is it possible to approve? How much are we into the initial funds at this point, Jamie?
It looks like we would have a balance after tonight's meeting, if I'm reading this email correctly, of around $400.
This is Commissioner Goklowski. Was any of the peer review monies used on the previous application?
So
I believe it was.
It's a separate. So basically what happened is the commission approved the peer review funds for this application as the balance of the peer review funds that remain from the withdrawn application, with the kind of the concept that the application is essentially the same project. And so the original RFP requested initial review and second review. So if you kind of look at the project across the two applications, we're at that point now. So if there's additional services needed, we're at that point, and that would have to be considered.
But this is a brand new this is technically a new application that was based off of the previous application that, from what my understanding was, this process was supposed to go smoother, and apparently it's not going smoother. It's kind of taken a sideways turn. So we're reviewing the new application, not the old application.
This is Commissioner Basserman, but didn't we approve the money just for this application?
Yeah, so funds got approved for this application, but it was based off of an RFP that was submitted for the previous application. And again, we're at the end of where that is. It's not uncommon during an review of an application with a peer review that the commission will determine that additional reviews needed and discuss what the additional complex application fee would be for that review. So I'm advising the commission that if you still feel that peer review needs to be ongoing for this application, that should be discussed tonight in regards to the complex application fee that would be associated. We could ask the peer review what they anticipate would be a needed time frame for providing a response letter to the outstanding comments.
This is Commissioner Boda. I would say for the sake of time and also just knowing that it is a large application with a lot of paperwork and a lot of technical details. And we have limited technical expertise on the commission. So why don't we continue, ask the peer reviewer what they would need for another review and another attendance at a meeting, and let's see if we can get a dollar amount and get that approved.
Is that something you want the peer review to respond to now, or is that something you're comfortable with with staff working with the peer review team and the applicant to address to continue the process?
The latter this is Commissioner Boda. The latter sounds ideal.
And it would be based on the hourly rate that was in the approved RFP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does the applicant have any concerns with that process?
This is Doug Anderson for the record from Beacon Hill. Yeah, that's fine. We just, you said there's a small balance there. So whatever additional time they have to charge for completing the review after we've, submitted the balance of the information that's requested, no problem. So let's just keep the ball rolling with them, and then whatever it is, and we'll take care of it.
Okay. I do think, I know it's late. I think we should see if anyone is here from the public that wishes to comment, and just ask that they keep it brief and that there is the intent to continue, I'm assuming, to the December 12th meeting.
Yes. Do we have any member of the public on the call that wishes to address any of the wetland issues that have been raised this evening?
I'm not seeing any hands raised.
I'm not seeing anything that I don't recognize. Of course, I'm only looking at 15.
Having trouble, you can throw something in the chat or unmute, but I'm also not seeing anyone that I don't recognize for other items. So
There's 4 not shown on my screen. Well, hearing none, I guess the only thing to do at this point is to continue 240902, I think that's the number, till the December 12th meeting. Anybody have issue?
No, do you need a motion for that, Commissioner Boda?
I think it can
Okay.
just be announced.
Say that again?
I think it can just be announced.
Again?
Continue to the December 12th
Right,
meeting,
okay.
which will also be held remotely via
Right, we
Zoom.
don't need to vote or anything. Great.
No, and the applicant
Thank you
understands
all.
the stuff that we need, that we're looking for the next meeting.
I will touch base with the applicant and
Great, thank you.
Okay. Have an enforcement action, cease and correct 240701, 15 and 7 Beacon Hill. Vegetation disturbance within wetland and adjacent upland area. This is a continuation of a show cause hearing. I guess I would make a motion that we continue this item until the December 12th meeting. Is there a second for that?
Commissioner Goklowski, I second that.
Anybody opposed? We don't need to vote there, even though it's a
it's a motion. You have
show
to vote.
cause hearing, do we? Jamie?
There's a motion on the table, so it needs to be voted on.
Right. Oh, we have to vote on, okay. Commissioner Goklowski.
Commissioner
How do you vote?
Goklowski, aye.
Commissioner Boda.
Commissioner Boda, aye.
Commissioner Begeman,
Commissioner Bergman, aye.
Commissioner Papatonis,
Commissioner Papantonis, aye.
Commissioner Armrod.
He's recused himself.
Yep,
Oh,
thanks,
that,
Jamie.
oh, on this one as well. Okay. And Commissioner Basserman, aye. Next up, cease and correct 240601 38 Howard Avenue, retaining wall and associated activities. Updates regarding plantings and compliant timeframe. Jamie?
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. So essentially for this meeting, we're looking to see that the nanny berries along the wetland / watercourse edge have been planted and kind of get an update on general compliance with the remaining portion requirements of the cease and correct order. So I did inspect the plantings on November 7th and November 8th. They have been planted along the watercourse edge. I was a bit concerned with the spacing initially, so that's why I did 2 inspections, because they revised the spacing. I touched base with the property owner about the monitoring requirements. The cease and correct order required that essentially either the approved site plan be implemented or the activity that occurred without a permit be restored to a pre-existing condition. And I guess I will hand it over to the property owner and or their representatives to kind of provide an update on where they are with doing that. And if the commission wants, I also have pictures of the plantings that I can screen share.
Good evening.
And who do we have as the property owner or the designee?
Attorney Marjorie Shansky for Kim McCabe and Charles Watts, who are here as well. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, the temporary restraining order remains in effect. The civil litigation is creeping its way through the Superior Court. Your decision approving the after the fact permit is under appeal. We are in front of both the Zoning Board of Appeals and the Planning and Zoning Commission. Planning and Zoning Commission for the 6.8 grading permit that will be amended out of the regulations as soon as the commission gets around to it, because it is redundant to the jurisdiction of your agency. And that has been discussed at the commission's meeting during the spring and summer, but they haven't gotten around to it yet. And we have an appeal pending before the Zoning Board of Appeals on an order from the zoning enforcement officer. Those meetings were to take place next week, but at the request of Mr. Diaz Romero, the owners of 34 Howard Avenue, asked if those could go into December because Dr. Nora was about to give birth. And we agreed to extend to December so that they could participate in those hearings on their timeline. And so that is where we are, under a temporary restraining order and have litigation in every direction.
Okay.
The site is stable. The site is stable,
right,
and
right.
Here we go into winter. So unless something develops along the way, I would suggest that we come and see you around the vernal equinox.
You may be optimistic. Jamie, any issue? I think we've talked about this before. I think the site is stable, so pushing this off do we have to fix a date given the nature of the cease and correct? Do we have to fix a date when we will come back to this, or can we leave it open-ended?
So
I beg your pardon. I don't mean to interrupt, but Mr. Chair, I would offer, rather than sitting through interesting meetings to get to this reporting, I'd be happy to provide you with correspondence on a periodic basis that advises you of how things are going.
Does that work, Jamie?
Jamie Frederick and the Wetland Agent. I think that's up for the commission to decide. I will mention, so I did go out to the site. The site was stable. The erosion controls were still in place. I do know there was a recommendation to remove the erosion controls by one of the wetland professionals. I think at this point there was some trampling of vegetation for the plant install. I didn't see any erosion concerns, but I think for, given everything that's going on and I don't have a problem with them staying there. They're certainly gonna, should anything change, they'll help ensure the wetland area is protected. I guess my main concerns are making sure that we ultimately get to a resolution. And then also with the monitoring, we're kind of now potentially split. So the plantings along the water course have been installed. However, the monitoring was to include all plantings as part of the proposal. So I don't know that that's a huge showstopper. I think it might just have to be something the commission considers as things progress. They certainly can't really do anything on site through the winter because we won't have site stabilization if they're going in and disturbing things. So I think the question is, when does the commission feel they need to be updated? And do you feel that that needs to be in person, or do you think correspondence might work? Or do you think it might be kind of playing it by ear where staff receives correspondence before the meeting, and depending upon what it contains, it can be determined whether or not it needs to be brought up in a more interactive manner?
This is Commissioner Bassman. The likelihood anything is going to happen, in the winter months is kind of remote, no? So why don't we have correspondence and then, pick March as the next face-to-face opportunity?
So to clarify, are you looking for correspondence for an update in March, or are you looking for correspondence prior to March and for them to attend a meeting?
If there's something worth noting in the correspondence between now and March, that should go to staff, and staff can update us at our regular meetings. And then in March, maybe we have a face-to-face.
Okay, so we're meeting twice a month now. Are you looking at March 14th or March 28th?
28th.
That's great with us, Mr. Chair.
Anyone from the commission have anything additional or concerns with that?
Thank you for the update, Attorney Shansky, and I'm sure you're up to your ears in paperwork.
Something like that, but thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night.
All right, applications for receipt, 241102, 183 Cherry Hill Road Extension, new single-family residence, possible agent review.
Yeah, Jamie Frederick and the Wetland Agent. So it's just for receipt, but I do want to give a quick high level. This is part of the 175 Cherry Hill Road subdivision. We recently were looking at another lot. The area of disturbance on the site aligns with the subdivision approval. However, they have modified the drainage. So is it something that the commission is okay with me doing administratively? Do you want me to kind of make that judgment? Or given the fact that there's a change in the drainage, do you feel that you need to review it at the December meeting?
This is Commissioner Bassman. How big is the change in the drainage?
So they're proposing so there's an increase in impervious area. So they're proposing an infiltrator system with overflows being split between going to the stormwater basin and going towards the rear of the site. The outlet of the drainage going towards the rear of the site is at the 100-foot upland review line.
That's interesting.
I don't want to dive too much into it because I told the applicant they didn't need to be here.
Right.
It's Commissioner Papantonis. I think it's a good idea for them to come next meeting.
Okay. I think if there's one commissioner that feels that way, then
Yeah.
vote that way.
Yeah, Commissioner Goklowski, I think appearance would be warranted if they changed it, and so.
Okay.
Works for me. And you got an agent approval, 20 Bayberry Lane.
Installation of a hobby lobby. Wow, no, a hobby greenhouse. I'm tired. Quite different. It's a small structure. It's less than 200 square feet. So I signed off on it.
Great. And let's see, other business, non-correspondence and announcements. We had a request letter from the Southwestern Conservation District. Jamie,
Yeah.
you want to mention that?
Frederick and the Wetland Agent. So every year they request an annual contribution. We've been doing it for the last couple of years. It's handled through the First Selectman's office, and that contribution has been provided. I did want to throw their name down on here, let the commission know about the request, and kind of remind commissioners that they are a resource that is available. And you can search, Google search for them and check out their website for more information on kind of what they do. Some of their services commission, some of their services benefit residents in general. So take a look at it if you're interested and reach out to us if you have any questions.
Next up, the SIPWIG Annual Symposium.
We had talked about putting a spot on here for brief highlights, takeaways that happened. So I don't know if anyone that attended has anything they want to report back to the commission.
Commissioner Ormrod, I attended. Mechanical methods are really ineffective for some of these species, and unfortunately, it looks like chemical controls are the way to go. Tree of heaven, especially Japanese knotweed, mugwort. So there's some interesting research there that kind of fortified my suspicions, and we have a lot of aquatic invasive in the region, so those are also something to watch out for.
Was it well attended, Matt?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe 100 people, give or take. Oh. And some of the breakout meeting sessions were really good. The Connecticut Ag Experiment Station had I thought their presentation was really great. So, and UConn's beautiful. I mean, they had perfect setup for the event.
Nice. Finally, we have the Kakiwik meeting this Saturday.
Yep.
I'll see some of you there. It's a little bit before 10. Anybody have anything they want to add? All right, we'll call the meeting adjourned. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
See you Saturday.
Thank you, everyone.
This program was brought to you in part through the support of the Town of Branford. Watch town meetings and other videos on demand at BranfordTV.org.